A big thank you comes to you today from Dead Rabbit via Patreon for his long support of the channel. Sheoldred versus Toski, Braids, and Marrow Gnawer. 3 lands with extra planar lens is hopefully good enough to ramp out in the early game and get our commander in. No means of refilling our hand at the moment, unfortunately, so not a good enough reason to ship it back. We will keep and just keep our fingers crossed. Jeweled Lotus on turn 1 means a turn 1 Braids coming into play. Gemstone Caverns did not get a luck counter on it, so just a turn 1 Braids. I doubt our opponent's going to sacrifice anything. That does mean now, and it's always why I'm in two minds about Jeweled Lotus, they get down their commander really quickly of course, but on turn 2 we can blow it up, meaning that they'll have only a few mana and this will cost 5, assuming that they can't reanimate it. A turn 1 play over here as well, Spire Tracer. Alright, Bojuka Bog is a tap land that can get rid of the Jeweled Lotus, so we'll just do that here. Don't think a black player will be grabbing it back, but good to get rid of it. Dreadhorde Invasion on turn 2 means that there'll be some creature sack fodder for Braids, and Braids comes in towards us, so now we've got a good excuse to blow it up, even though we were going to anyway. Shanodin Dryads is a 1/1 Forest Walker, so probably has Yavimaya in here, and if we get to search for a land at some point, probably grab Cabal Coffers. We're up against 2 other black players, which means we're likely to see Urborg. I'd rather not play my Urborg into their Cabal Coffers, which has happened multiple times before. The Spire Tracer correctly going at the Braids. Alright, and there's a Rankle, another means of dealing with the Braids. We will drop the Swamp, wait until the end of Marrow Gnawer's turn. He might get rid of Braids himself, meaning that we could hold on to the Infernal Grasp. Arcane Signet for Marrow Gnawer suggests that there won't be a removal spell. Could use the Infernal Grasp in response to some kind of equipment to waste our opponent's mana, but there's every chance that they've got a means of keeping this in play with Undying Instants and stuff, so we'll just do it now. And it does go into the command zone as opposed to sitting in the graveyard. Dreadhorde Invasion makes the first zombie. Felwar Stone and a land, 4 cards in our opponent's hand and not about to gain any more card advantage from the commander. We'll likely be able to afford his commander to come back out again next turn though. And because we made a Bojuka Bog on our first turn, we won't be able to defile it. Need another couple of turns to get swamps down in order to deal with the Braids again. And the green player starting to spread damage. The Forest Walk goes into the left and the Spire Tracer down the middle. Alright, a Malicious Affliction, so we've got a means of dealing with the Braids again, definitely there. Maybe just get down the Underworld Dreams. It's not incredible at the moment, but saves us mana later on, I suppose. Should be particularly good against the Toski player, but good against Braids as well if our opponent manages to stick it at any point this game. Read the Bones loses our opponent 2 life, and then they lose a further 2 life to the Underworld Dreams. They've already lost 1 during their draw phase as well, so starting to chip away at our opponents even before Sheoldred hit play. See a Phyrexian Tower now, and Braids managing to hit play again. And the 2/2 swings in towards us. Braids deciding not to sacrifice the zombie, surprisingly. Would have thought he'd want us to start losing more life so that he could draw. And by turn 4 the green player managing to make a 3rd land luckily, so Toski is 1 step closer to hitting play, which means holding up Defile for the Indestructible might be an idea. Okay, and the draw pain really starting to worry people now, so yeah, the green player swinging in towards us. Seen a Ronus's Monument to buff things and give trample. Alright, there's a Mana Crypt, that is one hell of a draw, so we could go for, we'll definitely grab a Swamp with this. Yeah, we could get down extra planar lens and then we'd have 4 mana held up. We'd have to sacrifice a Swamp obviously. Maybe we just hold up the Malicious Affliction and the Defile. Yeah, we'll go for our Sheoldred. Doesn't seem as though there's that much spot removal lying around, although Braids hasn't had much of an excuse to use it if he has any. If our Sheoldred does go down, then Malicious Affliction is going to be able to blow up 2 creatures, although it's noteworthy that the Affliction is just for non-black creatures, so yeah, it's difficult. We can obviously defile the Braids, but that means we can't get rid of the indestructible Toski, who might come down next turn. But do we care as much about Toski as long as we can keep these 2 black permanents in play? Yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway, our opponent takes 3 to both the Underworld Dreams and the Sheoldred. And that is a Vanquisher's Banner ready for the rats. So I think I'll just leave the Braids in play, and if they want to draw a card to that then so be it, at least they'll take some life to it. Could be that a zombie army is sacrificed here to the Phyrexian Tower, and that means that we could blow both of these up with the Affliction. And that makes the Toski player much less of a threat. Jadar, Ghoulcaller of Nephalia. That will make a Decayed Zombie at the end of the turn. Means that the Edict effects from Rankle aren't as good. And then an Oppression. So we're going to have to start discarding cards if we're not careful. Yeah, I think we just have to go for the Defile now on the Braids. And it may well be that the extra planar lens just has to be discarded to the Rankle being cast. Or if we're going to have to discard the extra planar lens anyway, do we just play it next turn, get rid of this, and then play the Rankle? I suppose it depends on what we draw during our draw step next turn. Jadar gets that zombie token. So no land apparently, but Toski only costing 3 mana. Thanks to the Ronus' Monument, we'll have to discard to the Oppression. +2/+2 and trample onto the Spire Tracer. And we'll see if he's still more concerned with us. Yep, looks like it. So Spire Tracer hits for 3 and the Forest Walk goes in at the left. Our opponent will draw 2 here, so he's going to take 6 damage to do it. Meaning that we're all roughly around the same life total at least. I'm managing to get into a land there, so we'll see if he's got another Dork. Had to discard the Beast Whisperer previously, which is a curious discard, makes you wonder what he's got in hand. Yeah, didn't have a 1-drop apparently, so just passing the turn with 5 cards in hand. We win the flip thankfully, so gain 2 during the draw phase. Draw into a Cabal Stronghold, so we only have to discard 1 card during this turn. And all the swamps that we make from now on will start to net as mana into this. So yeah, I am just going to discard the extra planar lens now that we've got the Cabal Stronghold. We just want more lands, I think. So cast Rankle into the Oppression. Get rid of the artifact, unfortunately. And then I'll continue to concentrate on the Braids player. And there's not much sense in going for the Edict effect on Rankle yet, because we'd have to sacrifice one of our good creatures. So we'll just make it lose a life and draw a card. And that means that we gain 2 life, each of our opponents lose 3 life. And then an additional 1 from the Rankle itself. So we're not really going off with Sheoldred here, but we are nicely chipping away at our opponents. Get to hold up more spot removal in a Baleful Mastery, which can deal with the Toski. So if they swing in with this next turn, which I bet they will, that will die, meaning we can go Malicious Affliction, blowing these 2 up, and then in response to the discard trigger, Baleful Mastery, we actually don't have the mana for, we could have gone after the Toski. So maybe that's a play to make in a few turns. Patria's Seal going to generate some more mana. It will also untap a legendary Marrow Gnawer in order to make more rats. Not worthy that this looks like it's a rat colony deck as well. Must have discarded that, of course, to the Oppression. So playing the Herald's Horn in order to try and gain some card advantage, being forced to discard again. And again it's a rat colony, so might have a means of mass reanimation in hand. The zombie here now a 4/4 at the beginning of the turn. I think it needs to be a 6/6. Yeah, power 6 or greater, it gains lifelink. Right, 2/2 swinging in towards us. I don't trust that this won't get Death Touch or something, so I'm just going to take the damage. Sacrificing the Decayed Zombie during the end of combat phase to Phyrexian Tower, so I must have an instant. Hopefully it's not removal for Sheoldred. Alright, and then going through to the main phase, so just wasting the mana from the Phyrexian Tower there, unfortunately. And then untapping the mana that he's got available and just passing through the turn, seemingly. Noteworthy that the Oppression does affect him as well. Green player during the upkeep goes for Beast Within onto the Sheoldred, so yeah, in response I think we can go Baleful Mastery onto the Toxrill, or Toski. That means that we do lose out on Malicious Affliction, but so be it. They will draw a card to the Baleful Mastery because we cast it for 2 mana, meaning they'll take a further few points of life. Noteworthy that this is target player as well, so we could have another player draw a card, which could be relevant with Draw Pain deck. Did manage to get our opponent into another 1-drop though. That is a Mold Adder. Whenever an opponent casts a blue or black spell, put a plus counter on it. They couldn't be at a much better table for that. And it's +2/+2 and trample going onto this, which I dare say will swing in towards us again. And yes, it does. Again, the Forest Walk goes into the left. Okay, draw into Animate Dead, meaning we could grab something like Beast Whisperer in order to try and draw more cards. Why don't we go in with the Rankle and see what we can draw into with that. If we can drop a land here, we could go for Sheoldred and the Animate Dead. That would be ideal. Going down the middle again. See if our opponent's holding up any removal. Looks as though he is. So target creature gets -3/-3 until the end of the turn. Maybe reanimating the Rankle is going to be an idea. Might as well go for the Animate Dead before anything else, because if we cast Sheoldred, we'll just have to discard that anyway. It's a shame that we can't get both down this turn. Yeah, it is curious. I think I personally would have taken the damage to the Rankle and then I could have drawn a card, because our opponent, instead of gaining a card here, he's going to go down 2 cards, one from the Oppression and one from actually casting this thing. But I suppose he does have to watch his life total. He does lose 3 life from this as well. May well see a big spell from our opponent being discarded here though. Oh wow, really? A Contamination? Yeah, I don't think much of that card, although against mono black decks it's not that great anyway. Okay, and I accidentally passed through my turn somehow. That's irritating. Well, Rankle has haste anyway, so hopefully we'll make a land next turn and we can actually reanimate the Rankle and still make use of the Sheoldred. Herald's Horn doesn't reveal anything, as it doesn't tend to. Overrated this card in my opinion, you very rarely get card advantage from it. And now a Karen Monix, the Rat King, gives other rats Toxic, but no rats to speak of yet. It's turn 6 and I think this is the first one we've seen. Discarding Nashi. And following that up with a Marrow Gnawer. Our opponent is drawing cards on these rats with the Vanquisher's banners, so it makes the oppression not quite as bad as it would be. Discarding another rat colony. And still managing to keep going, thanks to rat colony only costing 1 mana from the Herald's Horn. Once again discards a rat colony and draws another card. So our opponent's nicely set up here with Toxic and Fear. We'll be able to sacrifice this next turn and make a bunch of rats with Toxic. They will have Summoning Sickness as it stands now at least, so we've got a few turns to deal with that. The zombie gets its penultimate counter before it gains lifelink. Braids played with 15 life left and 3 cards in hand, although about to be 2. Might finally get some use out of Braids. Noteworthy that this thing has become a 6/6 thanks to being against a bunch of mono black players. Okay, so putting it in the correct order, Braids goes on the stack first, allowing Jadar to put down a decayed zombie if he wants to sacrifice that. Deciding to sacrifice the Oppression instead, we could get rid of Underworld Dreams, not going to bother doing it, I'll let my opponent draw. So he's going to gain 3 cards here. Have us all lose 2 life and then he'll lose 3 himself to the Dreams. Champion of Lamholt's a pretty scary one. Green player doing quite well considering he's only got 4 lands. Putting a buff on the Spire Tracer. Might have another spell yet. And yep, does have another one in Elvish Archdruid. Deciding to buff, yeah, the Shanodin Dryad. So a 3/3, a 4/4 and a 6/6. Wow, really? Are they all coming in at us? Our opponent's pretty worried, so we're just hoping for a board wipe at this point really. A little chump block. So once again we're all at roughly the same life total here. Good that we don't have to play around the Oppression now at least. Could take life to the Mana Crypt here though, but luckily we win the flip. Okay, a Cryptghast is a means of doubling up the mana, which I don't think is going to be relevant at this point unfortunately. Need to be getting into lands more than anything. And there's nothing all that great for us to reanimate either, so it'll just have to be the Rankle. And we'll attempt to get into the board wipe we need. And we'll carry on concentrating on the Braids player as we have all game. This player is about to gain a hell of a lot of life from this. Our opponent's about to gain a nice chunk of life from the zombie army token. Rankle hits, we'll just do the card draw thing again, because it might be that we want to play out the Cryptghast. I don't want to discard it if I don't have to. Alright, gets us into Teferi's puzzle box, so do we play that just for the fun of it at this point? This player's likely going to get rid of us next turn anyway. Well, we could play this out as a chump blocker, but if all the players go wide on us, which they are going to, then yeah, we're not going to survive, so just do the puzzle box, sheerly for the fun of it. Our opponents are going to have to shuffle their hand and then draw fresh cards at the beginning of the upkeep. Or actually, it's at the beginning of the draw step, I think. Yeah, so if we've managed to draw into the Animate Dead before the Sheoldred went down, obviously we could have reanimated the Sheoldred and then dealt a lot more draw pain here. It would have been 3 damage per card drawn, and our opponent will draw during the draw phase, then shuffle it all and draw 4 more. So that's 5 in total. 5 times 3 is 15, so that player would have gone down if we'd managed to get Sheoldred in play. This player would have gone down, and I think this player would have gone down as well, actually. So, yeah, getting rid of the Sheoldred, this player has managed to take us out here. Anyway, drawing it during the draw phase, then Teferi's puzzle box will resolve. Haven't done too well on ramping either, unfortunately. We have only 7 mana by turn 7. You'd obviously want higher mana than the turn it is, so by turn 7 you might want 10 mana or so. But we've been missing lands. Underworld Dream's going to deal a bunch of damage, help our opponents on the way out. And I didn't think that the Underworld Dreams was going to do a lot this game. It has just incrementally stuck around long enough to deal a hell of a lot of damage though. I assumed it was going to get blown up pretty quickly. But we have made a difference this game in depleting the life totals as far down as they've gone. So now we see a rat colony from our opponent, and they are just going to cantrip this time as opposed to having to stay at the same number of cards in hand thanks to this thing. Another rat colony into play. And another one. Alright, now a crippling fear. So that's not to say we're going to survive this, but it does mean that our opponents might not kill us. I mean, they're going to kill us, let's face it, but yeah, how much have they got here? These are 8 2s now. A 3-4 and a 4-4. So they could just swing in with these two and hold up the Marrow Gnawer, going for the Marrow Gnawer now. This will still be a 6-6 with lifelink, which will probably finish us off next turn. The Marrow Gnawer is going to generate a bunch of rat tokens, each of which are 2/2s with Fear and Toxic. And then Pariah's Seal is going to untap the Marrow Gnawer, and the Gnawer's going off here, sacrificing another rat colony. And now has, that is 13 2/2 tokens, and the rat colony is a 22. So that can hit us and take us out, and yes it does. Then that thing has Fear, so it can swing straight over at the green player as well. Alright, so we'll see what the other two players can do. Braids does have a full grip here, but not too much life. The rat tokens likely go wide on both players next turn. Cabal Therapist. And the zombie, I think this is the first time this has swung in, but it turns in at the right. Can't deal with the green player, but can gain a chunk of life here. Alright, and Cabal Therapist deciding to sacrifice the token there. I think he must have looked at the black player's hand. Anyway, getting down Massacre Girl, this is going to wipe the entire board, thanks to there being so many tokens in play. I think everything would have actually survived there if it wasn't for the fact that this thing went down. Yeah, if they had sacrificed this instead of the token, then Massacre Girl wouldn't have worked there. So, well worked out by my opponent. This game will continue. A Shire is another land drop at least. Herald's Horn actually revealing something this time with the rat colony. So our opponent should be able to rebuild his board quite nicely here. Throwing out the commander again first. Rat colony, and another, and a third, and a fourth. Our opponent now tapped out. And the rats are 7/2s with Fear, so a bunch of rats will be made from the Marrow Gnawer next turn. Assuming that he isn't just able to go wide on someone. Braids gets another zombie army token, and now we see Tevesh Sat, Doom of Fools, so able to make a decent number of chump blockers with that. And then ending the turn off with an Eco Wellspring ready to sacrifice to the commander. We've managed to add a nice decent amount of command attacks to this thing though. Augur of Autumn over here gives a +2 buff to the Shire, and follows that up with Kemrith, which switches off the Marrow Gnawer. That's the most direct threat at the table, I think, but yeah, Braids has been allowed to get away with a lot this game. In all fairness, at this point, I think Marrow Gnawer is the direct threat, because sacrifice a couple of rat colonies, make a bunch of tokens, and maybe go wide with the other two. Though our opponent's managing to put enough blockers in the way, so yeah, tough call that. Throwing out a Dryad Arbor as the land for the turn. Herald's Horn again doesn't reveal anything. Throwing into play a Locket of Yesterdays. Spells you cast cost 1 less for each card with the same name as the spell in your graveyard, so basically another means of making the colonies cost 1. Bontu's Monument. That is, yeah, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life, so if they can chain off enough rat colonies, which they've been able to do this game, then they'll be able to deal some nice chunks of damage with that. Seems as though our opponent's just going straight through to the combat phase though. Deciding to swing in with Marrow Gnawer. That's not going to get blocked by anything decent, so I'd probably hold that back as a blocker myself in the hope that you can destroy it and replay it. Holding back the rat colonies as 6/2s as well. Suppose our opponent here is forcing the chump block of the Dryad Arbor, but our opponent might not want to lose a land here, so could be forced to block with the Ashaya. Deciding to take the damage and go down to 3 with a Bontu's Monument in play. Then we see a gruesome fate. Each opponent loses 1 life for each creature you control, so that is going to get rid of the Kenrith's transformation. It's a shame our opponent didn't have 1 more creature in play. He would have been able to leave the Marrow Gnawer untapped. But he does have blockers this way at least. So down goes the green player and takes the Kenrith's transformation with him, unlocking the Marrow Gnawer again. He is able to untap it with the Protria's Seal. So likely does this at the end of the black player's turn, the other black player. This thing has done a hell of a lot of work for our opponent. Both our players at 6 life and through to the main phase of Braids. Tevesh sat, sacrificing a creature in order to draw a couple of cards. So now going in with the 4/4 and the 2/2, our opponent can just make blockers in response. Looks like that's what he's doing. So has 3 10/2s available and a bunch of 2/2s. I would just chump block the Massacre Girl personally in case they can reanimate it. So it looks as though that's what our opponent's doing. It maximises the number of creatures that you've got available as well. Deciding to kill the Massacre Girl is risky in a mono black deck. Our opponent does still have a 1 toughness creature, so this will get -1/-1 and then trigger -2/-2, which will take out pretty much everything. Or relies on our opponent actually being able to reanimate it though. And then, okay, had a damnation anyway, so doesn't make a difference. The Tevesh Sat is going to be the difference maker here, I think. You can see why I was concentrating on Braids the whole game. Kalitas, Traitor of Get, ironically coming down before the board wipe, although this just cares about non-tokens dying. Now the Bontu's Monument is still a threat. Our opponent might be able to get down enough creatures to trigger this enough to drain our opponent. He will be losing life to the Dreadhorde Invasion as well, but once again missing with the Horn. Did drop a land, so just 1 card available. Playing the commander again first, we'll draw our opponent a card and drain. And it's noteworthy that our opponent does have 5 mana available. So 5 rat colonies straight off the top would be pretty damn lucky, but it's doable. Only needs 4 though, thanks to that Dreadhorde Invasion. 2 cards in hand, and seems as though our opponent's just passing through the turn. So what can Braids do here? Goes down to 4 and drops a land. Then creates a couple of Thralls with the Tevesh Sat. Sacrificing a creature and putting a couple of plus counters on Kalitas. Turns out this making zombies is relevant. And I imagine that this is to gain some life for our opponent. It will survive against the commander. Deadly Rollick goes on to said commander, so now this can swing in for 5 and leave our opponent at only 2 life. And the Bontu's Monument becomes much less of a threat now, as Braids goes back up to 9. Herald's Horn fails our opponent yet again, so just being forced to replay the Marrow Gnawer, and with 1, 2, 3, 4 mana left held up, is hoping to draw into a rat colony. In fact, a series of rat colonies. Our opponent can just go for the plus counters on Kalitas again and keep swinging in at our opponent to gain life. And that, tied with activations on Tevesh Sat, is going to spell the end for our opponent seemingly. Didn't manage to get into another colony unfortunately, so the Dreadhorde Invasion makes another zombie for the Kalitas to eat. Tevesh Sat sacrificing likely a Thrall token to draw 2, deciding to play Braids again. So that will deal 2 damage to our opponent, and 2 damage again next turn most likely. Our opponent can prevent it by sacrificing a creature. If they swing in here, which they likely will, they'll have to block with the Marrow Gnawer, so that pretty much guarantees a draw from the Braids, and therefore guarantees 2 damage on our opponent. Kalitas does swing in now, whilst the Braids player is tapped out. Marrow Gnawer deciding to chump block of course, and it looks like our opponent has a trick up his sleeve here. Sacrificing an artifact with the Deadly Dispute. That was the locket of yesterday's. The rat colonies cost 1 anyway, so that doesn't matter. Drawing a couple of cards and making a treasure. Could have sacrificed the Marrow Gnawer if it was going down anyway, and that would have prevented Kalitas from gaining life because it wouldn't hit a creature that isn't there. So that would have been the play as opposed to giving up on that other artifact, but doesn't hurt him to lose it. Might hurt him to have our opponent gain more life though. Now Braids gets to sacrifice a zombie token most likely. Yeah, gets more sack fodder in the commander going down as well, but that would have gone down to the sack outlet regardless. So sacrificing the token from the Dreadhorde Invasion, and that has our opponent lose 2 life and he draws up to 7. So it's not looking hopeful for the rat player. Oh well, our opponent drew into a Cabal Coffers, has 4 cards in hand at the moment. So the additional mana allows our opponent back into the Marrow Gnawer. He's very much missing haste this game. Although I'm not sure even haste would help him here. Alright, and obviously drew into a damnation off the Marrow Gnawer being cast, so unfortunately blows up his own commander. Blowing up his commander leaves a zombie in play, ironically, which is enough to kill him. And then decides to scoop it up, so clearly doesn't have a means of playing another creature. Didn't get into any rat colonies towards the end there, never saw any mass reanimation either, so that's pretty unlucky. But a great back and forth towards the end there, so hopefully you all enjoyed it. Big thank you to my opponents for playing, and thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel so consistently. If you want to do that yourself, then there are some perks on Patreon, and the link is in the description below. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.